What does it mean to be strong? Julian Croft, CEO of a global logistics empire, thought he knew. Strength was a bull market, a hostile takeover, a 17-hour workday fueled by nothing but caffeine and resolve. It was weathering the storm of his wife's death and still managing to raise 2 children, even if the nannies did most of the heavy lifting. Strength was the cold, hard armor he wore every day, until he saw her. She was huddled in the alcove of his own skyscraper, a silhouette of resilience against the driving November rain. The storm was merciless, whipping sheets of water against the polished granite, but she remained impossibly still, a small, dark shape against the luminous glow of the lobby. He was on his way home, his driver idling at the curb, his children, Leo and Maya, buckled into their car seats in the back. He shouldn't have stopped. He should have just gotten in the car, the heated leather a welcome reprieve from the city's chill, and been driven to his sterile, quiet mansion. But something in her stillness snagged his attention. It wasn't the posture of despair he'd seen in others on the street. It was a kind of sentry-like calm, a quiet waiting. Her face, when a gust of wind blew her hood back, was etched with a fatigue that seemed ancient, but her eyes were alert, scanning the street with a practiced, sweeping gaze he couldn't place. They were the eyes of a wolf, not a lamb. He told his driver to wait. He grabbed the expensive cashmere coat from the seat beside him and walked into the rain. The icy drops soaked through his suit jacket instantly. He didn't care. As he approached, she didn't startle or shrink away. She simply watched him, her gaze level, assessing. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe late 20s. Her clothes were worn but clean, her hands tucked into her sleeves for warmth. "You'll freeze out here," he said, his voice louder than he intended over the howl of the wind. She didn't respond, just held his gaze. There was no plea in her eyes, only a profound, guarded weariness. He held out the coat. "Take this, please." She looked at the coat, then back at him. A flicker of something, pride, maybe, or suspicion, crossed her face. "I don't need charity," she said, her voice quiet but firm, not raspy from the cold as he'd expected. "It's not charity," Julian replied, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice. "It's a coat, and it's raining." Logic, a ghost of a smile, touched her lips, gone as quickly as it appeared. She slowly reached out and took the heavy garment, her fingers brushing his. Her hand was cold as stone. He saw the car, saw the faces of his children pressed against the window, their eyes wide. An idea, reckless and utterly illogical, formed in his mind. "Have you eaten?" he asked. She shook her head, a barely perceptible movement. "There's a diner 2 blocks from here. Best soup in the city." "My treat," he expected a refusal, another wall of pride. Instead, after a long moment, she gave a single, slow nod. He led her to the car. As he opened the back door, his 8-year-old son, Leo, stared at the woman with frank, unblinking curiosity. 5-year-old Maya, however, simply smiled. "You're all wet," she said to the woman, a statement of simple fact. The woman looked at the little girl, and for the first time, the hardness in her eyes softened, melting into something warmer, something achingly vulnerable. "I am," she said. "My name is Anya." Julian Croft had just invited a complete stranger into the orbit of his carefully controlled life. A stranger who sat with the ramrod-straight posture of a soldier, wearing his $1,000 coat as if it were a piece of issued gear. He didn't know it yet, but the foundations of his world, the very definition of his strength, were about to be systematically dismantled and rebuilt by the quiet woman in his backseat. The silence in Julian's cavernous home was usually a hollow, echoing thing. Tonight it was different. It was a weighted silence, filled with the presence of Anya. After the diner, where she'd eaten a bowl of soup with a slow, deliberate focus that suggested it was her first real meal in days, the rain had turned to a freezing sleet. The thought of leaving her at a shelter, or worse, back in that alcove, had felt physically impossible. So he'd offered her the guest room, just for the night. She'd agreed with that same quiet nod, her eyes giving nothing away. Now, she stood in the center of the immaculate guest suite, The plush white carpet a world away from the gritty pavement she called her bed. She hadn't touched anything. She simply stood, observing, her gaze taking in the abstract art on the walls. The king-sized bed with its mountain of pillows, the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the glittering, indifferent city. To Julian, it was a room. To Anya, it was a tactical position, one exit, good sightlines, but poor cover. She mentally mapped the house's layout from her brief walkthrough, noting the creak on the third step of the main staircase and the way the alarm system sensor blinked red by the patio door. Habits, ingrained in the bone and blood, died hard. Downstairs, Leo approached his father. "Who is she?" he asked, his voice low. Leo had been quiet and watchful since his mother's passing. His grief a shell he rarely emerged from. "She's someone who needed help, buddy," Julian said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Is she staying?" The question hung in the air. "Just for tonight," Julian answered, though the words felt uncertain on his tongue. Maya, however, had no such reservations. She trotted up the stairs, clutching a piece of paper in one hand and her worn stuffed elephant, Bubbles, in the other. She found Anya still standing in the middle of the room, wearing a simple gray sweatsuit the housekeeper had left for her. Anya turned as the little girl entered, her posture immediately less rigid, her hands unclenching at her sides. Maya held up the drawing. It was a wobbly portrait of a stick figure with long brown hair under a sky filled with a yellow sun and a very large, smiling rain cloud. "This is you," Maya announced. "You're the sun, not the rain." Anya knelt, bringing herself to eye level with the child. She accepted the drawing as if it were a precious artifact. Her throat felt tight. No one had drawn her a picture in a very, very long time. "Thank you," she whispered. "It's beautiful." Maya then held out her stuffed elephant. "Bubbles can sleep with you," she offered. "He's very brave. He's not scared of monsters." Anya looked from the worn toy to the little girl's earnest face. This small act of trust, of unconditional welcome, pierced through layers of armor she'd spent years building. She gently took the elephant, its fabric soft and smelling faintly of lavender soap. "I'll keep him safe," she promised, and the words felt like a vow she hadn't made in years. Later that night, Julian was walking past the kitchen when he heard a faint noise. He peered in to see Anya, a screwdriver in hand, quietly tightening the leg of a wobbly antique chair that had annoyed him for months. She moved with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing, her touch precise and confident. She tested it, gave a satisfied nod, and placed the tool back in the drawer she'd found it in. She wasn't a guest making herself at home. She was a soldier securing her environment. She looked up and saw him watching, her expression unreadable. "It was loose," she said simply, offering no other explanation. In that moment, Julian saw it again. Not weakness, but a deep, hidden well of competence. This wasn't just a woman adrift. This was a woman who knew how to fix what was broken. The next morning, Julian was running late for a critical board meeting. He was frantic, grabbing his briefcase, shouting instructions to the nanny, and kissing his kids goodbye in a blur. He got all the way to his office downtown before a cold dread washed over him. His wallet. It wasn't in his jacket. It wasn't in his briefcase. He remembered leaving it on the kitchen island, right next to the fruit bowl. His mind raced. It contained everything: his credit cards, his driver's license, hundreds of dollars in cash, a worn photo of his late wife. He trusted his staff implicitly, but Anya was an unknown quantity. A knot of cynicism, a defense mechanism honed by years in a cutthroat business world, tightened in his gut. He hated the thought, hated himself for having it, but it was there. What had he done, bringing a stranger, a homeless woman, into his house with his children? For a moment, he considered calling his security team. But the image of Maya handing Anya her stuffed elephant stopped him. He took a deep breath and called the house landline. Anya answered on the second ring, her voice calm and clear. "Hello. Anya, it's Julian. I think I left my wallet on the counter." There was a brief pause. "Yes," she said. "It's right here, next to the bananas." He could hear the complete lack of guile in her voice. There was no hesitation, no surprise. Okay, good. Thank you, he said, the relief so palpable it made him dizzy. I'll get it when I get home. Of course, she replied and hung up. The interaction was so simple, so devoid of drama, that it left him feeling ashamed of his initial panic. When he returned that evening, exhausted and drained from the meeting, the wallet was sitting exactly where she'd said. Nothing was touched. Nothing was out of place. Anya was in the living room with the children, sitting on the floor and helping Leo with a complex Lego spaceship. She wasn't telling him what to do, but quietly handing him the pieces he was looking for just before he realized he needed them. Her focus as intense as a surgeon's. Leo, who usually built in frustrated silence, was quietly explaining the ship's hyperdrive system to her. Maya was leaning against Anya's side, drawing another picture. A sense of peace permeated the room, a feeling Julian hadn't recognized in his own home for over a year. He stood in the doorway watching them, feeling like an intruder. Later, as he was changing for dinner, he realized his watch was missing. It was a Patek Philippe, a gift from his father, worth more than most cars. He searched his dresser, his bedside table, his pockets, a fresh wave of anxiety cresting over him. He walked back into the living room, a question forming on his lips, but he stopped. Anya stood up, walked over to the bookshelf, and picked up the watch from where it had fallen behind a row of books. She held it out to him, its gold face gleaming in the lamplight. "I think this is yours," she said, her expression neutral. She must have seen it fall when he'd pulled a book out for Leo earlier. She hadn't made a show of it. She hadn't used it to prove a point. She had simply waited for the right moment to return what was his. The test hadn't been for her. It had been for him. He had been weighing her worth, her trustworthiness, based on her circumstances. But her integrity wasn't circumstantial. It was absolute. It was the core of who she was. "Thank you, Anya," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. He was a man who bought and sold loyalty, who dealt in contracts and clauses designed to mitigate risk. Anya's character needed no such contract. It was self-evident, and in the face of her quiet, unshakable honor, he felt profoundly humbled. The fragile peace of the Croft household was shattered by the shriek of tires and the jarring bang of a car backfiring on the street outside. It was a common city sound, one Julian and the kids barely registered. But for Anya it was a trigger. In the space of a heartbeat, she moved. One arm swept Maya behind her, shielding the little girl's body with her own. Her other hand instinctively went to Leo, pulling him down behind the solid oak coffee table. She dropped into a low crouch, her body a coiled spring of readiness, her eyes scanning the windows, assessing threats, pinpointing angles. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. It was fluid, economical, and terrifyingly instinctive. The danger passed as quickly as it came. The car sped off, its bass-heavy music fading down the block. The house was silent again, save for the frantic beating of Julian's heart. He stared at Anya, who was slowly, deliberately uncoiling. She straightened up, her hands leaving the children. Her face was pale, her breathing controlled but sharp. She saw the shock on Julian's face, the fear in Leo's wide eyes. "Sorry," she murmured, her voice tight. Loud noise, she ran a hand through her hair, a gesture of forced casualness that did nothing to hide the adrenaline coursing through her. She was trying to put the mask back on, but the crack was too wide. Julian had seen behind it, glimpsed the battlefield she carried inside her. He didn't press her. He simply knelt and hugged his children, reassuring them that everything was okay. But later that evening, after the kids were asleep, he found her sitting on the back porch, staring up at the night sky. She was holding a small, tattered photograph, its edges softened with wear. He saw it was a picture of her, younger, smiling, her arms slung around a young man in army fatigues. They both looked impossibly young, vibrant, and indestructible. "My spotter," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She didn't look at Julian, just kept her eyes on the photo. "His name was Mark. He was my best friend." She didn't need to say more. Julian understood the past tense. He sat down in the chair beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. The silence stretched, filled with the chirping of crickets and the weight of unspoken grief. "We were on patrol," she began, the words coming out in a slow, pained trickle. "A village outside Kandahar. I was point. He was my eyes. He saw the tripwire a second before I did. He pushed me clear." She fell silent, her thumb tracing the outline of Mark's smiling face in the photo. "He took the full force of the blast. My fault. I should have seen it. I was the ranger. I was the leader." The self-recrimination in her voice was a raw, open wound. Julian finally understood. The hyper-awareness, the coiled stillness, the reaction to the car, it wasn't paranoia. It was training. It was survival. And it was trauma. "That sounds like he saved his friend's life," Julian said softly. "It sounds like he was a hero." Anya finally turned to look at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "He made me promise," she choked out. "Promise I'd go see his mom in Vermont. Tell her he was okay. Tell her he loved her. But I couldn't. I couldn't face her. After I got out, everything was too loud, too bright. The world didn't make sense anymore. So I just walked." She had been walking ever since, carrying the weight of a broken promise and a debt she felt she could never repay. The street had been her penance, a quiet, anonymous purgatory. Her homelessness wasn't a failure of character. It was a symptom of a wound so deep, it had severed her from the world she was trained to protect. Julian felt a profound wave of empathy wash over him. He knew grief. He knew how it could hollow you out and leave you disconnected from your own life. He didn't offer platitudes or easy reassurances. He just sat with her in the quiet darkness, a silent witness to her pain. And for the first time since she'd left the service, Anya didn't feel entirely alone with her ghosts. Anya's presence began to subtly transform the house. It wasn't through grand gestures, but through 1,000 small, consistent actions. The chaotic mornings, once a frantic scramble of mismatched socks and frantic searches for homework, became models of quiet efficiency. Anya would be up before anyone else, a silent presence in the kitchen. She'd pack the kids' lunches with a precision that bordered on art, each sandwich cut perfectly, a piece of fruit and a small, healthy snack tucked alongside it. She established a simple visual chart for Leo and Maya to follow. Brush teeth, get dressed, eat breakfast, pack bag. The routine was a comfort, a predictable rhythm in their upended lives. For the first time in a year, Julian wasn't starting his day with a cortisol spike. The house, once a sterile showpiece curated by interior designers, started to feel like a home. The scent of baking bread or simmering soup often filled the air. Anya had found a worn, leather-bound recipe book in a box of her things, one of the few possessions she'd kept. It was her mother's, filled with handwritten recipes for simple, hearty food. Cooking seemed to ground her, the familiar motions of kneading dough or chopping vegetables a form of meditation. The kids adored it. They'd sit at the counter, watching her, Maya occasionally helping by stirring a bowl of batter with more enthusiasm than skill. Her unique skill set emerged in unexpected ways. When Leo's school project, a diorama of the solar system, was on the verge of collapse, Anya assessed it with a critical eye. She used wooden skewers to create a support structure, securing the planets with a series of tiny, perfect knots she explained were used for securing gear in the field. The diorama was suddenly indestructible. Leo looked at her with a new level of awe. "You're like an engineer," he said. Anya just smiled. Something like that, she made the children feel safe in a way that had nothing to do with locks on the doors. When a thunderstorm rattled the windows one night, Maya woke up crying. Julian rushed to her room, but Anya was already there. She wasn't cooing or coddling. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, speaking in a low, calm voice. "It's just noise, Maya," she said. "Listen, you can count between the lightning and the thunder. 1,000, 2,000. See? The storm is moving away. We have a good, solid roof over our heads. We're secure here." She was giving the little girl data, a way to process her fear, a mission. Within minutes, Maya's tears subsided, and she fell back asleep, clutching Bubbles the elephant. Julian watched from the doorway, marveling at her. He dealt with threats to his company, market fluctuations, corporate espionage with teams of lawyers and analysts. Anya faced a child's fear with innate calm and tactical reassurance. He found himself coming home earlier. The pull of the office, once his only refuge, had weakened. He wanted to be in this new atmosphere of warmth and stability. He started having dinner with his children every night, not just on weekends. He listened as they chattered about their day, their stories often circling back to Anya. Anya taught me how to tie my shoes with a double knot so they never come undone, Leo would announce proudly. Anya and I built a fort in the living room and Bubbles was the captain, Maya would add. He saw his children healing. The haunted, withdrawn look in Leo's eyes was being replaced by curiosity and engagement. Maya's laughter, once a rare treasure, now echoed through the halls regularly. It was all because of Anya. She was the scaffolding that was allowing his broken family to rebuild itself. One evening, he came home to find the three of them in the backyard. Anya was teaching them how to read a compass. The red arrow always points north, she was saying, her voice patient and clear. If you know where north is, you can always find your way. Julian stood there, watching the setting sun cast long shadows across the lawn. He realized that's what Anya had become for them. She was their north. In the chaos of their grief, she was the fixed point that was helping them find their way home. The invitation was for a high-profile charity gala benefiting the city's children's hospital, an event Julian chaired every year. He'd almost declined to attend, but the cause was too important. On a whim, he asked Anya if she would come with him and the children for the family-friendly afternoon portion. He wanted her to be a part of their life, not just a secret fixture within the walls of his home. After some hesitation, she agreed. The housekeeper helped her find a simple but elegant navy blue dress, and when she came down the stairs, her hair pulled back in a neat twist, Julian felt his breath catch. The dress didn't hide her strength. It accentuated it. She looked poised, graceful, and completely out of place among the city's elite, yet more grounded than any of them. The event was held in a sprawling botanical garden. For a while, it was perfect. The kids played games. Anya watched over them with her usual quiet vigilance, and Julian networked with donors. He felt a sense of rightness, of completeness, seeing them all together, a fledgling family unit. But he had forgotten the circling sharks. A photographer from a notorious gossip publication spotted them. Julian Croft, the city's most eligible and reclusive widower, with his children and a beautiful, unknown woman. It was a story. The photographer was discreet, snapping photos from a distance with a long lens. Julian didn't even notice until it was too late. The story broke online 2 days later. The headline was a masterpiece of insinuation and cruelty. Grieving tycoon Julian Croft finds comfort with mystery homeless woman. The article was worse. It painted Anya as a cunning opportunist who had latched onto a vulnerable billionaire. It used carefully selected photos, one of Anya looking tired and disheveled from a distance, likely taken weeks ago, juxtaposed with a picture of her at the gala, looking polished. It mentioned her unknown origins and transient lifestyle, twisting her quiet dignity into something sinister and calculating. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The phones at Croft Logistics began ringing off the hook. The company's stock took a small but noticeable dip. Members of the board, guardians of the company's pristine public image, were furious. Julian was summoned to an emergency meeting. The boardroom was cold, the long mahogany table a battlefield. Peterson, the lead director and an old family friend, laid it out in stark terms. "Julian, this is a disaster for optics," he said, his voice grim. "Our brand is built on stability, reliability, trust. The media is portraying you as unstable, reckless. They're questioning your judgment." "It's a lie," Julian shot back, his hands clenched into fists under the table. "They've twisted everything. The truth doesn't matter." Another board member interjected. "The perception is what matters. We have donors for the hospital foundation threatening to pull their pledges. They don't want their names associated with this scandal." The word hung in the sterile air, ugly and unjust. She is the most honorable person I have ever met, Julian said, his voice low and dangerous. Peterson sighed, softening his tone. I'm sure she's a lovely woman, Julian, but you have to understand our position. You're the face of this company. You're a father. You brought a homeless person into your home with your children. Think of the liability. Think of the message it sends. The implication was clear. Anya was the problem. She was the liability he needed to mitigate. From the hallway, where she had been waiting to bring Julian a folder he'd forgotten, Anya heard every word. Each phrase, disaster for optics, liability, homeless person, was a physical blow. She saw the impossible position she had put him in. She had brought chaos to his ordered world, danger to his children's sanctuary. Her presence was a threat to everything he had built. Without a sound, she turned and walked back toward the main house, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She knew what she had to do. She had to be extracted. For the good of the mission. For the safety of the unit. The ultimatum from the board was unspoken but absolute. Fix this. Get rid of her. Julian returned from the corporate office to find the house stiflingly quiet. The warmth that had seeped into its bones over the past few weeks was gone, replaced by the old, familiar chill of grief and emptiness. He found Anya in her room, the guest room she had made her own. Her small duffel bag, the one she'd arrived with, was on the bed. Inside was the gray sweatsuit, folded neatly. On top lay the worn recipe book and Maya's first drawing of the stick figure with the sun. She was leaving. Anya, don't, he said, his voice rough. She turned to face him, her expression a mask of calm resignation. But he could see the deep hurt in her eyes, a pain that mirrored his own. They're right, Julian, she said, her voice steady. I'm a liability. I'm putting you and the children at risk. Your company, your foundation. I can't let my problems become yours. You're not a problem, he insisted, stepping closer. You're the best thing that has happened to this family in years. And look what it's costing you, she countered, gesturing vaguely towards the window, towards the world outside that was judging them. I know how this works. The media will keep digging. They'll find my service record, they'll find what happened to Mark, and they'll twist that, too. They'll turn a tragedy into a sideshow. I won't put you or his memory through that. Her logic was flawless, tactical. She was cutting the cord to save the rest of the unit from a perceived threat. It was the most selfless and most painful thing she could do. But Julian was done listening to the cold logic of board members and public relations experts. He had spent the last year making decisions based on optics and shareholder value, and it had left him hollow. Anya had taught him about a different kind of strength, a different kind of honor. He made a choice. He pulled out his phone and called his head of communications. Arrange a press conference, he said, his voice ringing with an authority he hadn't felt in months. 1 hour. At the main entrance, Anya stared at him, confused. What are you doing? My job, he said. Leading an hour later, Julian Croft stood before a throng of reporters and cameras, the flashbulbs popping like enemy fire. He looked calm, resolute. He didn't have notes. He spoke from the heart. I called you here today to address the recent stories about my private life, he began, his voice steady. The stories are correct on one point. A woman named Anya has been staying in my home, but they have failed, utterly and completely, to capture the truth of who she is. He paused, letting his gaze sweep over the crowd. You have portrayed her as a vulnerability. You are wrong. She is the strongest person I have ever known. You have painted her as an opportunist. You are wrong. She is the most honorable, selfless person I have ever met. She has brought light and laughter back into a home that was dark with grief. She has cared for my children with a tenderness and wisdom that has left me in... He leaned into the microphone. My board is concerned about optics. My donors are concerned about appearances. Well, I am concerned with character. I am concerned with integrity. And Anya's integrity is unimpeachable. If the price of doing business is to cast out a good and decent human being to appease a manufactured scandal, then I want no part of that business. This company, my family's legacy, was built on the principle of doing the right thing, not the easy thing. Anya is the right thing. She is family. And if anyone in my company or in this city has a problem with that, their problem is with me." He finished, turned, and walked back into the building without taking a single question, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. It was the boldest, most reckless, and most honest thing he had ever done. But when he got back to the guest room, it was empty. Anya was gone. The only thing left on the bed was the stuffed elephant, Bubbles, sitting sentinel over a folded piece of paper. Anya walked through the city streets, the anonymous crowds a welcome cloak. The rain had started again, a cold, persistent drizzle that matched the ache in her heart. Leaving had been like tearing a part of herself away. The muscle memory of street survival kicked in. She found a dry alcove under an overpass, pulled the hood of her jacket up, and settled in for the night. But the concrete felt colder than ever before. The city sounds harsher. The warmth of the Croft home, the sound of Maya's laughter, the quiet intensity of Leo's Lego building. They were ghosts that haunted her, more persistent than any she'd faced in combat. She clutched the faded photograph of Mark, her only anchor to the past, and wondered if she was destined to always be alone, a sentinel guarding nothing. Back at the mansion, a profound and desolate silence had fallen. Julian's public stand had been a Pyrrhic victory. He had defended her honor to the world, but he had lost her. The house felt empty, hollowed out. The children felt her absence most acutely. Maya refused to eat her dinner, pushing her plate away. "I want Anya's soup," she said, her lower lip trembling. Leo retreated into a sullen silence, refusing to make eye contact, his Lego spaceship sitting abandoned on the living room floor. That night, Julian found Maya's bedroom door slightly ajar. She wasn't in her bed. He found her in the empty guest room, curled up on the floor where Anya's bed had been, clutching the navy blue dress Anya had worn to the gala. She was crying softly. "I want her to come back," she whispered, her small body shaking with sobs. The next morning, the house was a tinderbox of grief. Leo wouldn't get out of bed for school. "It's not home anymore," he said, his voice muffled by his pillow. Julian's heart broke. His grand gesture, his public defense, meant nothing if his children were this miserable. He had failed to protect the one thing that mattered, their fragile, healing hearts. He walked into the kitchen and saw a new drawing taped to the refrigerator. It was from Maya. It showed their house with stick figures of him, Leo, and herself inside. Outside, under a storm cloud, was a single, lonely stick figure of Anya. At the bottom, in shaky, 5-year-old print, were 3 words, "Come home, Anya." That was it. The child's simple, powerful truth cut through all the corporate speak, the media noise, the adult complexities. It was a direct order, a mission. Julian carefully untapped the drawing from the fridge and folded it into his pocket. He had no idea where to start. The city was massive, but he had to try. He started with the shelters, driving from one to the next, showing Anya's picture, asking if anyone had seen her. Hours passed. The faces of the people he met were etched with stories of hardship and resilience, and he felt a growing shame for his prior ignorance of this entire world that existed in the shadows of his skyscrapers. Finally, at a small, underfunded veterans outreach center near the docks, a weary-looking volunteer recognized the photo. "Yeah, she was here," he said. "Came in late last night. Quiet one. Said she was just passing through." He pointed to a common room. "She was just sitting in there a minute ago." Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. He walked to the doorway and saw her. She was sitting at a table, staring into a cup of coffee, looking smaller and more lost than he had ever seen her. He walked over slowly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up as his shadow fell over the table, her eyes widening in surprise. He didn't say a word. He didn't command her to come back or plead with her to return. He simply reached into his pocket, unfolded Maya's drawing, and placed it on the table between them. Anya looked down at the childish drawing, at the lonely stick figure under the rain cloud, at the 3 simple words. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek and splashed onto the paper. He saw the walls she had so carefully constructed crumble into dust. "They need you," Julian said, his voice soft but firm. "I need you. Come home, Anya." She looked from the drawing to his face, and in his eyes, she saw not pity, but partnership. Not charity, but family. She gave a single, slow nod. And this time, it wasn't a gesture of resignation. It was a promise. When Anya returned to the house with Julian, it wasn't a triumphant entrance. It was a quiet homecoming. The moment she stepped through the door, Maya launched herself into her arms, wrapping her small limbs around Anya's legs and burying her face in her jacket. "You came back," the little girl whispered. Leo stood in the doorway of the living room, trying to look indifferent, but the relief on his face was unmistakable. He walked over and, without a word, pressed his head against Anya's side. She rested a hand on his hair, and the fractured family felt whole again. With the public storm now settled into a grudging curiosity and the board silenced by Julian's resolute stand, the dynamic in the house shifted. The pretense was gone. Anya was no longer a guest or a project. She was a part of their lives, and they were a united front against the world's judgment. One evening, sitting on the back porch where she had first told him about Mark, Anya finally told Julian everything. She spoke of the grueling ranger training, the intense camaraderie of her unit, the feeling of absolute purpose she had lost. She described the guilt that had consumed her, the feeling that she had failed her friend, his family, and her country. "I was trained to lead missions, to solve impossible problems," she said, her voice laced with old pain. "But I couldn't solve this. I couldn't fix myself." Julian listened, not just to her words, but to the deep well of talent and strength that lay dormant within her. He saw not a broken soldier, but a brilliant strategist without a mission. An idea began to form, a way to channel her pain into purpose, to use his resources to honor her past. He called a meeting with the board of the Croft Foundation, his family's philanthropic arm. He didn't ask. He informed. "We're launching a new initiative," he announced, his voice leaving no room for argument. "It will be a program dedicated to elite special operations veterans who are falling through the cracks of the traditional support systems. We will provide comprehensive mental health care, housing assistance, and, most importantly, high-level career placement that utilizes their unique skills." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. "Julian, that's a very niche demographic," Peterson began. "Exactly," Julian said. "They are the best of the best, trained to be leaders, logisticians, and problem solvers. But when they come home, they're told to forget all that and get a job in sales. We're wasting an incredible national resource. This program will bridge that gap." He looked around the table. "And it will be co-directed by Anya." A stunned silence filled the room. Julian continued. "Her tactical experience and first-hand understanding of the challenges these veterans face are invaluable. She will design the support structure. I will handle the corporate partnerships. Together, we will build something that actually works." It was a bold, unprecedented move. But this time, no one argued. They had seen the steel in Julian's spine. Back at the house, he told Anya his plan. She was silent for a long time, her mind processing the scale of what he was proposing. It was a chance not just to heal but to lead again. A chance to ensure that no one else like her or like Mark ever had to feel so lost. "I have one condition," she said finally, her voice clear and strong. "The first branch we open, it's going to be in Vermont, and we're going to name it after him. The Mark Connolly Center for Veteran Excellence." Julian smiled. "I wouldn't have it any other way." For the first time in years, Anya felt the fog of her grief begin to lift, replaced by the clear, bright light of a new mission. She wasn't just fixing a wobbly chair anymore. She was helping to rebuild lives. Months melted into a year. The Mark Connolly Center became a resounding success, a model for veteran support programs across the country. Anya thrived in her role, her quiet competence and strategic mind perfectly suited to the complex logistics of the foundation. She met with veterans, her shared experience creating an instant bond of trust. She designed intake protocols, built support networks, and placed former Green Berets and Navy SEALs in executive roles where their skills were not just valued, but celebrated. She even made the trip to Vermont and finally sat with Mark's mother, not to deliver a broken promise, but to show her the living, breathing legacy her son had inspired. The house was no longer a house. It was a home, filled with the easy rhythms of a family. The ghosts of grief had not vanished, but they had retreated, making space for new, happy memories. Julian and Anya were partners in every sense of the word, navigating foundation board meetings and parent-teacher conferences with the same united purpose. He saw the way she helped Leo with his math homework, patiently explaining complex problems until he understood. He saw the way she tucked Maya in at night, listening to her elaborate stories about Bubbles the elephant's adventures. He saw a future he had never dared to imagine. One crisp autumn evening, the family was gathered in the kitchen. The air was rich with the smell of roasting chicken from one of her mother's recipes. Anya was helping Maya frost a lopsided cupcake, while Leo was explaining the plot of a fantasy novel to Julian, who was trying, and failing, to chop onions without his eyes watering. It was a scene of perfect, chaotic domesticity. Later, after the children were asleep, Julian and Anya sat at the kitchen table, a comfortable silence between them. The house was quiet. He looked at her, at the way the soft kitchen light caught the lines of concentration on her face as she reviewed a file for the foundation. He thought back to the woman he'd met in the rain, the guarded soldier hiding in plain sight. He thought of all she had survived, all she had overcome, all she had given to him and his children. He didn't have a ring in his pocket. He hadn't prepared a speech. This wasn't a strategic acquisition. It was a simple, profound truth. He reached across the table and took her hand. She looked up from her papers, her gaze questioning. "My mission for the longest time was about building an empire," he said, his voice quiet and sincere. "Then it became about just surviving. But since you came into our lives, my mission has changed." He squeezed her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her skin. "My mission now is to make sure you and the kids are safe and happy, and that you never, ever feel alone again." He looked into her eyes, his heart open and vulnerable. "But I can't do it alone. I need a co-director, partner." Anya's eyes glistened. She knew this wasn't a business proposal. It was a life proposal. It was everything. She thought of her years of solitude, of the promise she'd made to herself to never rely on anyone again. But what she felt with Julian and the children wasn't reliance. It was reinforcement. They made each other stronger. Her lips curved into a soft, genuine smile. "Is that an official offer?" she whispered. "The most official," he replied. "Yes," she said. The word was simple, but it held the weight of every battle she had fought, every loss she had endured, and every bit of hope she had for the future. "Yes, I will." Julian smiled, a smile so full of relief and joy it transformed his face. He stood, pulled her to her feet, and kissed her, a quiet promise made in the heart of their home. Outside, the city glittered with a million lights, a million stories. But inside this kitchen, a family had been forged not by blood, but by choice, by courage, and by the simple, radical act of seeing the strength in a stranger huddled in the rain. We walk past people every day, never knowing the wars they have fought or the silent strength they carry. Perhaps the greatest mission we can undertake is to simply stop, to offer a coat, and to see the hero hiding in plain sight.